I'm Dr. Josef Witt-Doerring. I'm board certified psychiatrist, and I help people come off psychiatric medications. And today we're going to be reacting to Matt Walsh's rant on ADHD. For those of you who don't know him, he is a conservative pundit and cultural commentator. And so let's dive in and see what he has to say.
We talked last week about RFK Jr.'s confirmation hearing, which gave me another chance to stand on what is, to my audience, a very familiar soapbox. I made the case, as I have so many times in the past, that the greatest big pharma scandal is not the COVID vaccine, though that is a huge scandal, or how big pharma has contributed to the opioid epidemic by getting thousands of Americans hooked on painkillers, though again, a major scandal. It is the fact that they have used misinformation and outright lies and fabrications to convince millions of otherwise healthy people to take highly potent psychotropic drugs.
To put this in context, we're actually talking about a fifth of the American population who is taking psychiatric medication on a daily basis. So just put that in context. That's tens of millions of people. And this is just insane.
Working with the psychiatric industry, big pharma has, over time, medicalized the entire human condition, every thought, emotion, feeling, prescribed a drug to treat it, as though a feeling or thought or mental disposition is automatically diseased just because it happens to be unpleasant or inconvenient.
So what he's getting at, it's like the diagnostic creeping. So originally, there are only a few conditions which people really needed to go and take medication for. This would be like melancholic depression, where people would become catatonic and frozen. These were things like mania in bipolar disorder. These were things like severe psychosis in schizophrenia. And so we had this core of, what I think are quite legitimate psychiatric problems that are probably rooted in genetics. We haven't found exactly why, but I think that makes sense. But over time, as the drugs had become a lot more profitable, it's just expanded. And now we're saying, mild depression and anxiety, children with inattentive problems or hyperactivity, these people have diseases now. And so it's gotten out of control. There's even adult ADHD, where, now, a fifth of the American population thinks they have a mental disorder and need meds.
The invention of ADHD and the mass prescribing of amphetamines to children in an effort to treat this completely contrived disease.
And that's right. I like that he uses the word amphetamine, because I think there's this distinction where people are like, methamphetamine, bad, ADHD medications, meds. It's not. It's all the same thing. We're talking about stimulating medications for focus. ADHD medications, especially things like Adderall and Ritalin, these are amphetamine-like substances that exist in the same family as things like methamphetamine.
Is the worst example of this. And I've made the case against ADHD as a medical diagnosis many times. I won't repeat the whole rant here. You can check my YouTube channel to find many different versions of my anti-ADHD soliloquy. If you listen to the case that I make, and that plenty of other skeptics have made over the years, you'll understand that we are not denying the existence of what psychiatrists would call ADHD symptoms. ADHD is not a discrete disease like liver cancer. It is a description of a set of behaviors. And there's no doubt that those behaviors are real. Yes, many children, especially boys, exhibit them. What we deny is that those behaviors are inherently disordered, that they are an indication of an illness, and that they should be eradicated through the use of psychotropic drugs. That is our point. And there's more to be said on that general point.
Yeah. I mean, what he's getting at is complete common sense. But I think if you would say this in most psychiatric circles or in people who work in mental health today, they would say that there was something kind of like invalidating or discriminating against that. But let's just unpack that. So he's saying, yes, it does make sense that kids have inattentive problems and they can be hyperactive and they can be boisterous and they can get in trouble at school. Yes, people can have brain fog and difficulty concentrating. But where do you draw the line between that being a sign that a brain is malfunctioning versus that being part of the normal human condition? That we exist on this bell curve, right? And we have some people who are just really well adapted to sitting down, focusing, doing computer work, sitting in classrooms, that technical stuff, and they can focus and it's fine. And then we have another portion of the population who just, that's just not the way their brains work. They want to be more physical. They want to be more active. And I think what we've done in our profession is that when someone isn't suited to a specific environment, like that academic school type environment, instead of looking at them and saying, maybe this isn't the right fit for you, maybe, you exist somewhere else on the bell curve where your skills are in another area. We say that they have a brain illness, and it's something that can be fixed with a medication. And so I think what he's saying is a really valid point, which really doesn't get enough airtime.
So instead today, what I'd like to do is share one specific thought related to this topic. It's been on my mind after reading a message from a parent who insisted that although they agreed generally with my point about Big Pharma and even my point about ADHD, they had no choice but to put their own 7-year-old son on ADHD drugs because his behavior was so wild and so disruptive, and he struggled so much in school. They, quote, tried everything before resorting to medication, they claim. And that is a refrain that I have heard countless times. I cannot tell you the number of conversations I've had with and emails I've read from parents who claim that they went the medication route as a last resort after, quote unquote, trying everything. But here's my problem with parents who say they tried everything before putting their children on drugs. My problem is that it isn't true. It can't be true. How could you have tried everything? The child is 7 years old. Even if he's 8 or 9 or 10 or 12, there's no way that you tried everything. If your child's been diagnosed with ADHD or you suspect that he has this artificial illness, consider this before you claim that you've arrived at your last resort. Have you tried drastically reducing his screen time? I mean, cutting it down to 30 minutes a day from the hours a day he's probably currently getting. Have you tried cutting down your own screen time and using that time to interact with your child, play games with him, give him something enjoyable and wholesome and constructive to focus on? Did you try changing his diet?
I'm going to stop on the changing the diet piece there, but let's just comment on all of that. I get what he's saying, and I also see the other side because I know a lot of parents out there who do put their kids on these medications. And I guess, my initial reaction to it is that, man, it's hard. It's really hard to be a parent these days, especially if both of the parents are working. And so I hear what he's saying, you have to go and try all of these things. But I feel like an honest response here for me in the world that we live in these days, we got both parents working, come home exhausted, turn on the TV. Usually the family is pretty sick as well. Like if the parents are eating poor processed food, they have low energy, they have brain fog, and they're just exhausted. And obviously the kid is having problems as well if they're eating poor food. And so there's that one piece of it where I think we live in a very different world these days where parents are kind of pulled away from the household for work, and they don't actually spend that much time with kids anymore. Whether that's the right way we should be living or not, I'll sidestep that one for now, because I know a lot of people don't have a choice. So we just have these we have these factors just in the way that we live our lives now that make these things difficult. Spend more time with your kids, less screen time, all of that. When parents are both working and they're exhausted and they're eating crummy food, man, that can feel hard. The other thing that I want to add on top of the changing the diet is that sometimes there's some really great functional medicine strategies for these kids. I've seen kids do really well with magnesium. I've seen kids do really well with things like lithium orotate. I've also seen kids do great with targeted supplementation as well. You don't want to look at just the interaction stuff and getting rid of screen time, things like that. You also want to look at their physical health, because poor food and also these nutritional deficiencies can also cause problems, can also make kids seem inattentive and hyperactive.
Did you try getting all the processed sugary junk out of your house completely? Did you try finding him some kind of sport or outdoor activity that allows him to burn off energy and develop useful skills?
That is so important for boys. one of the ways I think boys calm down is just by being active. And if the kids aren't being active, they're not going to burn off the energy. So like this sedentary lifestyle stuff, it's one of the best strategies for helping with ADHD.
Mandatory 45-minute reading time at night before bed, where all screens are turned off and he sits and reads, or you read to him and you kind of unwind and you get that experience of reading. Did you try harsher punishments for misbehavior? Did you try...
I'm just going to pause here because I remember someone told me something. This is actually going back to that previous comment about exercise. I think in Chinese medicine, they say that exercise for men is their way of detoxing, that you run around, you sweat, you get toxins out of your body. I've heard this before, but man, that makes so much sense to me. And, you know, in my own life, I know that when I'm physically active and I'm sweating, I feel a lot calmer and a lot more focused. So I really think there is something to exercise specifically for ADHD.
Introducing serious consequences for serious misbehavior. Did you try all of that? Now, I know that you'll probably say that you did, but you didn't. I know that you didn't. And if you have a kid in elementary school on ADHD drugs, I'm flat out telling you, you did not try all these things. I know that you didn't try them, because trying them means implementing these strategies and sticking with them for years. It means giving these seeds time to grow fruit. It means giving your child time, a lot of time.
There's so much similarities here with ADHD and then just any other area of personality or development. Because, you know, a lot of people out there will get put on psychiatric meds for anxiety and depression. And you talk to them and it's like, you know, I'm lonely and I don't know what I'm doing, you know, with my life. And then you want to ask them, well, you know, have you tried developing your social skills? Have you tried, you know, maybe working with a therapist or a coach to kind of push yourself a little bit outside of your comfort zone to learn how to interact with other people, to build up those skills over time? Have you tried, you know, just staying in some relationships for a while and just learning how to be with someone else and going through a breakup and then getting in another relationship and going through a breakup and learning all of these and having all of these experiences. So eventually you can actually be in a marriage and you know how to do it because you've actually done it. That process could take a decade. It could actually take a decade to learn how to be well socialized and interact with people. And the whole thing is just stunted if when you go in and you say, you know, I'm alone, you know, I'm anxious and depressed, and the doctor doesn't even ask you about anxiety and depression. They just say, oh, they don't even ask you where it's coming from, whether it's a relational thing. They just say, oh, you got a problem, we're going to put you on this drug, when they really should have been encouraging you to develop social skills. Alternatively, work seems to be the other one. A lot of people complain about they don't like what they're doing. Do you really want to numb a person to enjoy what they're doing or to have what they're doing become more tolerable? Or do you want to have a hard conversation with them and say, well, maybe this isn't the right path for you. How do we get you out of here? Is there a way we can pivot you into something else? Do you need to go back to school? Do you need to go through this training? How are you going to do it? You know, when you have bills and a family, you kind of want someone to sit with you and work through these hard problems so that maybe in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, you're actually on a better trajectory. And that's what building a life is about. So these things take time, but we've been conditioned to think that, you know, they're brain illnesses and we just kind of medicate them away. And you know, what Matt's talking about here with ADHD is really interesting, that the parents aren't allowing the kids time to actually just like live their lives and develop and find their interests. It's really sad.
He needs a lot of time. You cannot possibly be at your last resort when he's 7. You haven't given any of these strategies even close to the amount of time they need. In other words, you actually haven't tried anything. You've tried nothing. Medication is not your last resort. It's your first. He's 7. There is no last here. What is the last? His existence just began 7 years ago. You haven't given him any time. You haven't given him any chance to grow and mature. You tried these methods to help your son, but you abandoned them way before they could have possibly shown results. So give your child time. He needs time. You tried everything, but the one thing you didn't try was time. So it's like saying that you tried everything to make a perfect loaf of bread, except leaving it in the oven for more than 2 minutes.
I feel like when people say this, ADHD advocates sort of like they scream at you. They're just saying, this is a real medical condition. You know, it's not something that's going to go away over time. And gosh, I have to say, I just think it's wrong. I mean, yes, maybe for the rare person out there that has done everything. And like Matt says, I don't think a lot of people have done everything because it goes beyond just like the parenting things and time. You know, it also goes into dietary modification and seeing like a functional medicine doctor to make sure there's no medical issues going on. But man, there's so many things you can do before essentially parking your kid on ADHD meds.
You know, you've employed every bread-making strategy you possibly could think of, so long as it would take less than 2 minutes. Well, in that case, you haven't actually tried to make bread because, sorry, bread takes time. Children take a lot more time.
Getting your work sorted out. I know I'm talking about depression and anxiety and building relationships and connecting to other people and learning those skills. Man, that can take like a decade as well. The similarities here, I have to point them out.
That's the job of parenting. It requires sustained, consistent effort for years and years and years. That's the gig, right? It's what we signed up for. And this is a very important point that I actually think about a lot. Because this false urgency, this need to fix our kids in 30 seconds or less is what Big Pharma preys upon. I mean, they've made billions on this. It's the same sense of panic and need for quick fixes that led many parents to put their children on chemical castration drugs as a way of fixing what would have otherwise been a very temporary confusion about their gender. Most of the worst decisions.
Yeah, or put them on SSRIs because they were having teen angst, or they were going through just an understandable rough period in their life where they didn't know what direction that they were going in with work, and they were having difficulty with relationships. And then they park them on a drug that can take years to come off and could even hurt them when they come off.
The most unintentionally destructive ones are made in the name of fixing a child quickly. They are motivated by a false sense of urgency, by this hallucinatory idea that a child's most challenging behaviors must be changed right away, or else some unspecified terrible thing will happen. They're made because the parent doesn't want to, or has been convinced that they shouldn't, give it time.
What I think is crazy these days is how much pressure parents put on their children. You know, I think there's this idea that, you know, you want your kid to get great grades and they're going to volunteer and they're going to pad their resume, you know, even though they're a teenager, because you want to get them into an Ivy League school so they can go and get, you know, a great job at a law firm or become some doctor or something like that. And it's just I'm old enough now, and I've seen enough, and I've I've had a lot of friends mature and find jobs. That's just so the wrong way to look at things. I think about what really makes people happy, and what really makes people happy and successful is when they're doing what they love to do. And you can have a kid who's struggling in school because they're not interested in the content, and you can put them on stimulants so they're subdued and focused. And then they go on to get some job that they don't like. You know, it's the job that you want for them. They'll go and they'll end up working in banking. And then, you know, when they're 30, they'll realize that they don't like the side effects from the stimulants, and they feel like it's stunting their creativity and their personality, and they come off. And they wake up at 30 and they realize that they hate their careers. And they go, I don't like this. Why am I doing this? And that person has been robbed of the opportunity to actually find something that's interesting to them. This is a true story. This is something I've heard from someone that I know. And again in my life, I've seen this, where we've sent people to college who probably shouldn't have gone. I had a lot of friends when I was in college. We were living on the dorms, and they would just be trying to study and do schoolwork, and they hated it, and they felt terrible about themselves because they failed, and they would smoke a lot of weed, and they would drink a lot. And when they left college, they got some job that everyone thought was beneath them, just some road construction job. And as soon as they started doing something that actually clicked for them and they enjoyed, they ascended. And so now I see, these guys who really struggled academically, they have very good careers, in things like construction, because they actually found something that they like doing. And gosh, it's a whole lot more sustainable when you do it that way. And so, I do think parents out there panic and they go, oh my God, I want my kid to have a better opportunity than I did. So he needs to have some white collar job and he needs to do well in school. We can't have him just be boisterous and enjoying sports. That's unacceptable. You're setting them up to fail, I think, in the long run. You need to nourish the kid that you have and guide them in the right direction towards finding something that they love. Obviously this is all couched, if the kid is struggling because of attentional problems, because they just aren't interested in something. If they have a medical issue that needs to be fixed with diet or functional medicine, obviously help them with that. But I think you get what I mean.
Here's the thing about kids. And if I could get parents to understand one thing, it might be this. Nothing is permanent. Everything changes. And they go through phases. And those phases can be intense. They could last for 6 days or 6 years. But either way, they won't last forever.
It's so true. I think about my life. I became a really great student by the time I left high school. I needed to get into medical school. But all the way up until grade 10, I was just run-of-the-mill average student. I was way less interested in what my teachers had to say, and I was way more interested in just running around outside, climbing trees and catching lizards back in Australia. And something just shifted. I don't know what it was, but I became a lot more studious later on when I was 16.
So just to give you one example of the dozens and dozens that I could supply from my own life and my family, my oldest daughter struggled to read, hated reading for many years. From the age of about 4, right around the time when you first start reading, to right around 11. Getting her to read was like pulling teeth. And she had a very hard time with it for a long time. She was, for a long time, way behind her peers. And yes, as parents, we worried about it. For all this stuff that I'm saying about, give it time, it's not easy to do. I understand that. And so as a parent, we're worried and we're fretting. And we can't help but imagine a dark future where our daughter is 25 years old and can barely read. Well, then one day it changed. And now at 11 and a half, we can't get her to stop reading. I mean, she reads like 2 whole chapter books a week. I'm talking books that are 300 pages. She's just...
Drop it in the comments below if you've seen that in yourself or you've seen it in your own children, how these things change. I think that would be really cool to read.
Burning through them. She reads morning, afternoon, and night. I catch her in a room with a flashlight 2 hours after bedtime, still reading. And then she wakes up and starts reading again. The other day, I actually had to tell her to stop reading and come watch TV. Okay, I wanted to watch just about an hour of TV as a family. We don't watch a lot of TV, but I wanted to do that. And she wanted to stay in her room and read. I had to say words that perhaps no parent has ever uttered to a child before. Put the book down and come watch TV.
He's funny.
Because she's a reading addict. It's amazing. I love it. It's incredible. The point is that kids change. And her change seemed sudden and out of nowhere. And it was sudden, but it wasn't out of nowhere. We worked with her for years and years and years. Every day for years. And it's just that we saw little progress visibly. And then we saw a gigantic Grand Canyon leap of progress all at once. That's the way it is with kids, in my experience. But you have to give them time. Before you start messing with their brains and drugging them and medicating them and medicalizing them,
it's so bad.
Give them time. Lead them in the right direction. Take them by the hand and pull them along if you have to, which most of the time you will. But give them time. And this is especially important, I believe, for boys. If you think that your son has a deficit of attention, if you think that he's incapable of focusing on or paying attention to anything, my question is this. How many things have you tried? Are you sure that he has some sort of neurological inability to focus? Or do you mean that he very specifically finds it difficult to focus in school? Is he able to pay attention for long periods of time to anything else? If there's something he can focus on and pay attention to, but he struggles to pay attention in school, the problem is obviously not a physical inability to pay attention. The problem is that he's bored in school. If you are drugging him in that case, the disease you're drugging and treating is boredom.
Oof.
You are drugging your son because he's bored.
I think it's helpful to say it like as directly as he is in this moment, because gosh, it sounds awful. Just as bad as it is, you're choosing to drug your kid who's anxious or drug your kid who's depressed, especially if it's coming from understandable problems in their lives. How is that the solution to fixing real things happening in people's lives? Is to not help them with it, but instead drug them with it. I think it's good to stop there and just reflect on that.
By something that is in fact very boring. And if that sounds pretty awful, it's because, I'm sorry, it is pretty awful. Now, you might say that, well, there really isn't anything that my son can focus on.
All right, let's stop it there. Say what you want to say about Matt Walsh. I know he is a polarizing figure, but from my perspective, he's absolutely nailed it when he talks about the psychiatric drugging of children and the overuse of medications. Tell me what your takeaways were from this video. Love to hear about them in the comments below.